this is a very delicate situation in terms of what is actually going to stop and what are going to be the arrangements, what's going to happen if there's any type of violation or perceived violation. One of the questions I have is whether or not Iran's command and control system still is tight, and whether or not there's going to be any type of sort of rogue actions that it might be taking on behalf of the Iranian, people. And so I think we really have to still wait to hear from both Iran and Israel, the main protagonists in this conflict, about whether or not a ceasefire really is going to be put in place and whether or not it will hold.
We are monitoring any news, and we will bring folks that. Along the lines of what we know that happened today, NBC News is reporting, and Richard Engel has been all over this story, and he specifically said that the nature of the strike and well-defended targets indicate that Iran's retaliatory strike was a symbolic attack, and that Qatar was also reportedly informed ahead of the attack. Our reporting also notes that Qatar was informed by the Iranians. Qatar then informed the United States. As of right now, there are no casualties. Lots of people had described this as an off-ramp. What say you?
I think the Iranians clearly recognize that if the United States wanted to do more damage inside of Iran, we certainly have the military capability to do that. Iran doesn't have the ability to defend many of its targets. As it's shown, the Israelis really have riddled that country's defense network. And so I think Iran was trying to find out what it could do that would, in fact, signal that these strikes were unacceptable from the United States, and so wanted to do something. But as you pointed out, the strikes against the attempted strikes in Qatar, and with the Qataris and the United States being made aware of it in advance, I think it demonstrated that the Iranians are really trying to show restraint here, and I think are trying to approach this in a way that is seeking to de-escalate the tension, the conflict. And I really do hope that others are going to follow the Iranian lead as far as trying to bring down this conflict so that we don't see the region engulfed in flames.
Well, last night you had the President of the United States going to Truth Social to talk about regime change, and you had Steve Bannon today warning that regime change, which I would call regime collapse, could lead to U.S. military in Iran. Do you agree?
Well, it certainly could. The record on regime change in the Middle East is not good. Whether you're talking about Iraq or Syria or Libya, it's easy enough to carry out these military strikes and defang, the regimes and even bring them down. But what happens in the days and weeks, months and years afterward? And we're still dealing with the repercussions of what I think was a very misguided U.S. decision to invade Iraq in 2003. So I think the repercussions of what has happened over the past several days are still to be felt. And we have to see exactly how the Iranians are going to react, what the Israelis are going to do. But I don't think by any means that this issue has been put to bed, because the underlying issue about what Iran is going to be allowed to do with its nuclear program and whether or not it will be allowed to enrich uranium, which was the sticking point in the recent negotiations, is going to be something that will be addressed. But at this point, I think there are still more questions than answers.
Taking a sort of a wider lens to the developments over the last few days and even weeks when you consider Israel's actions, the Washington Post had a very interesting narrative around the risky strike Trump's put his presidency on the line, and they noted former Presidents Barack Obama and Joe Biden confronted similar dilemmas with Iran and made a different calculation than Trump, though neither faced a Tehran that was quite as weak as it is now in the aftermath of the collapse of its proxies in Syria, Lebanon, and Gaza. Rather than strikes, those presidents sought a diplomatic pathway to limit Iran's ability to build a nuclear weapon, fearing the possibility of getting sucked into a conflict they did not desire. There are a couple of things here that I think are interesting to make note of. One is Obama and even Bush, for that matter, but certainly Joe Biden, dealt with a very different Iran than the one that Donald Trump has had to deal with, given how they were, if you put it in street terms, softened up by the strikes by Israel beforehand. But the other part of this is the possibility of getting sucked into a conflict they did not desire. Is that still a risk for Donald Trump at this point, despite his, bravado with his, all caps tweets and all of that, that there's still an aspect of this Tehran, Iranian kind of storyline that could see the U.S. still grappling with this a year, 2 years, 3 years from now?
No, absolutely, because we don't know where this is headed. And you're not going to be able to resolve this issue by military force. Yes, we've degraded, significantly, damaged the Iranian nuclear program, but there's going to have to be some type of negotiated settlement on this, or some type of negotiation that's going to address the Iranian nuclear program, which is why the Obama administration worked so hard to get the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action in place.
Right.
And so Donald Trump, when he tore up the U.S., agreement to that, basically allowed the Iranians then to go on this path. We wouldn't be where we are today if, in fact, we still had that agreement in place. Because Fordo...
That's an important note to make.
Yeah, Fordo was prohibited from enriching uranium, period.
Right.
And the Iranians were limited by enriching uranium only to like 3.5% level, which is far, far below weapons grade. And the IAEA had a very invasive inspection regime. And so the reason why we are here is because Donald Trump, again, pulled out of the agreement. He didn't say no to Bibi Netanyahu, who wanted to go ahead and strike Israel, while Presidents Biden, President Obama, and President Bush told Bibi no. And also, he's the first president to actually carry out these strikes against Iranian nuclear facilities. So, again, we still have a lot to learn. We don't know where this is going to go. Hopefully, it's going to go in a better direction. Nobody wants to have the region just collapse in conflict. But at the same time, if they think that this one and done is it, I'm sorry, but it's not going to happen.
To your point about Fordo, the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency said, this is a quote from yesterday's emergency United Nations meeting. At this time, no one, including the International Atomic Energy Agency, is in a position to assess the underground damage at Fordo. You juxtapose that with the claims that the president and, his Secretary of Defense on down are claiming that completely obliterated the site was. The Director General of the agency that could say that says no one can assess that at this point. I say that to say this all boils down to the intelligence. And I still think that there are questions, and tell me if I'm wrong, but are there not questions on the table about what prompted the administration to do this? They keep saying that they had information, but the United States did not have that information. So where did that information come from? What information is prompting them to make claims as though the sites were obliterated? The intelligence is actually very important because the intelligence, it should be guiding what we're doing, or am I wrong?
When our intelligence agency says, hey, Iran didn't have the capabilities that the president claimed that they did for the attack.
I think the credibility of this administration really has been shattered. I don't think it was ever strong, but it has been shattered over the past several weeks. The U.S. intelligence community, by all accounts, still assesses that Iran has not restarted their nuclear weapons program, which they suspended in 2003. There's been no contrary claims by this administration that the U.S. intelligence has changed on that front whatsoever. And even if they were moving, as they were, with more highly enriched uranium, they still were far away from actually being able to get a warhead. So what was the triggering event that led the U.S. to actually carry out these strikes? Clearly, I think, as Michael pointed out, Iran is in a much different place now with Hezbollah and the Houthis and others that really have been degraded. And so Bibi Netanyahu saw that this was a great opportunity, a very propitious moment for Israel to go and hit Iran. And Bibi Netanyahu led Donald Trump down this path. And unfortunately, Donald Trump followed what Bibi Netanyahu was saying. So, again, I think there are a lot of questions about what that intelligence was, at what basis did this administration decide to go ahead and carry out these strikes, and also then what's going to be the bomb damage assessment that's going to actually be taking place, and how significantly degraded is the Iranian nuclear program. And I think we have real questions about whether or not this administration will be honest.
Only have about 30 seconds left of picking up on that point, Director Brennan. If you were a member of Congress, what is the one piece of intelligence you think would be most critical for you to have in your hands?
The latest intelligence assessment about the status of that Iranian nuclear program, but then also I want to know what the status of the Iranian nuclear program is, and especially where is that highly enriched uranium that was enriched to 60% that seems to have been moved out of Fordo before the strikes took place, and what's the disposition of that, and what's the potential for Iran to use that for nefarious purposes?